"Please don't shoot my daddy!" the 6-year-old screamed from the back seat, his tiny voice trembling with fear. The police officer's gun didn't move. In that frozen moment, everything changed. The silence, the stares, and the horrifying realization they had the wrong man. By the time the truth came out, the damage was already done, to the father's dignity and to the child's heart forever. It had been an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Marcus Taylor picked up his 6-year-old son, Jaden, from school. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting golden streaks across the city streets as fathers, mothers, and school buses shuffled children back home. For Marcus, the routine was familiar, even comforting. As a warehouse supervisor working night shifts, these afternoon pickups were the highlight of his day. It was their time, just him and Jaden, no rush, no distractions, just the bond of father and son sealed in small talk and quiet laughter. Jaden was a bright and imaginative boy, full of energy and questions. That day, he clutched a crumpled sheet of paper tightly in his hand, a drawing he had made for Father's Day, even though it was still weeks away. The drawing, made with colorful markers and big block letters, showed a stick-figure version of Marcus wearing a cape. "You're my superhero," he had told his dad with a proud smile as he climbed into the back seat. Marcus had smiled, folded the drawing neatly, and slipped it into the sun visor above his head. That simple gesture had lit Jaden up like a light bulb. As they drove through the neighborhood, Marcus kept the windows rolled halfway down, letting the spring breeze drift in. Jaden talked non-stop about his day, how he had won a race at recess, how Mrs. Benton had given him a gold star, how someone lost a tooth during lunch. Marcus laughed occasionally, tossing in a "wow," or "really," as he listened. His eyes never strayed from the road, and his speed stayed within the limit. His seatbelt was secure, his car was recently serviced, his registration and license up to date. Everything was in order, just as it always was. They were less than 10 minutes from home when Marcus noticed a police cruiser change lanes behind him. He glanced in the rearview mirror casually at first, but the car didn't pass. It stayed directly behind him, trailing his every move. Marcus turned down the music slightly, his fingers tensing just a bit on the steering wheel. The flashing lights hadn't come on yet, but he knew the feeling. He had felt it before, more than once. That still silence before the storm. The sudden shift in energy that made the air inside the car feel heavier. When the blue and red lights finally did come on, Marcus felt his stomach twist. His foot lifted off the gas as he turned on his signal and slowly pulled over to the curb. Jaden paused mid-sentence in the back seat, his small voice trailing off into confusion. "Are we in trouble, Daddy?" he asked, his tone light but uncertain. Marcus took a deep breath, offering a steady reply. "No, buddy. Everything's fine. Just a traffic stop. Sit tight." He placed the car in park, lowered the windows further, and kept both hands on the steering wheel. It was a practiced routine, one that came second nature to many black men who had lived long enough in America to understand the silent rules of survival. Be respectful. Be calm. Keep your hands visible. Make no sudden movements. No matter who you are, no matter how clean your record is, assume they see you as a threat. In the back seat, Jaden leaned forward in his booster seat, eyes wide as he peered through the rear window. "Why are they stopping us?" he asked. Marcus glanced up at the rear-view mirror again. The officer had exited the cruiser and was approaching slowly, hand already resting on the holster. No lights were broken. No speeding. No swerving. The tires were inflated. Everything was fine, at least on paper. "I don't know, Jay," Marcus said softly. "But it's going to be okay." There was no fear in his voice, only a quiet firmness. But inside, Marcus felt his heart begin to race, not because of anything he had done, but because he knew how quickly things could turn. He had read the headlines. He had seen the videos. He had whispered prayers for strangers who didn't make it home. And now here he was, trying to shield his son from even the smallest seed of that reality. Jaden fiddled with his shoelaces, sensing the sudden shift in his father's tone, even if he didn't understand it completely. The safe bubble of his childhood, so carefully built by Marcus, had a tiny crack forming. A moment was coming, one that neither of them could control, and it would change something between them forever. Not the love, never that, but perhaps the way Jaden would see the world from now on. A little less innocent. A little more afraid. The sound of boots crunching on the pavement drew closer. Marcus's jaw tightened. His eyes stayed forward. His hands did not move from the wheel. As the footsteps closed in, the air inside the car grew thick with tension. What had begun as a routine ride home was now unraveling into something unpredictable. The presence of not one but two officers outside the vehicle sent a message louder than any words. This was not just a traffic stop. This was something else. Something more aggressive. More dangerous. Marcus remained motionless, hands firm on the steering wheel, heart thudding in his chest. Behind him, Jaden's eyes were glued to the side mirror, his face shifting from curiosity to growing concern. Commands came sharp and fast, shouted over the hum of traffic and wind. The officers ordered Marcus to exit the vehicle with his hands raised. There was no explanation, no request for license or registration, no courteous tone. Just authority, hard, unrelenting, and full of assumption. As Marcus slowly complied, his every motion measured and deliberate, Jaden called out from the back seat, asking if everything was still okay. His voice was smaller now, edged with confusion and fear. Marcus answered calmly, instructing him to stay seated and not move. He tried to sound confident, but even Jaden could sense the change. Something was wrong. Marcus stepped out of the car, both hands raised high above his head, as instructed. He stood still on the sidewalk, away from his car, under the watchful eyes of two drawn weapons. There was no resistance, no sudden moves, nothing aggressive in his posture, and yet the tension remained high. One officer kept a hand on his firearm while barking questions, while the other paced slowly around the car, glancing through the windows, his attention eventually locking on the back seat. Jaden, small and scared, sat frozen in his booster seat. When the officer's hand moved toward the holster again, Marcus instinctively stepped forward, pleading with him to understand that it was only his son, just 6 years old, just a little boy who didn't know what was happening. That movement triggered a louder response. Marcus was ordered down to the ground, flat on his stomach, hands out, fingers spread. Asphalt scraped his elbows and knees as he obeyed, still speaking in a calm, clear voice, trying to de-escalate, trying to explain that his son was terrified and alone in the back seat. No response came. The cuffs snapped tight around his wrists, cold and unyielding. In the car, Jaden began to cry. His voice echoed through the open window, calling for his father again and again, but there was no answer. Only silence, the shuffle of heavy boots, and the occasional crackle of police radios. Jaden didn't understand what was happening. One moment he was talking about drawings and superheroes. The next, his father was on the ground, surrounded by strangers in dark uniforms. He asked if his daddy was in trouble. No one answered. He asked if they were going to hurt him. Still no answer. Then, trembling and afraid, he shouted through the window, begging the officers not to shoot. The sound of that tiny voice, broken and pleading, cut through the chaos like glass. A child's desperation. A child's horror. A child realizing that the people he had been taught to trust were now the reason his father lay face down on the pavement. Inside that moment, time warped. Cars passed by, drivers slowing down to look, windows rolling up with awkward glances. Some pedestrians paused on the sidewalk, unsure whether to intervene or keep walking. No one stepped in. No one said a word. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air, pressing down on everyone in the vicinity. It wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was fear, escalating and spilling into the life of a 6-year-old who would never forget this day. After several long minutes, the officers finally began asking for identification. Marcus, still face down, explained that his wallet was in his back pocket. He asked that they retrieve it gently, without alarming his son any further. They did, rifling through it in silence before returning to their patrol car to run his information. The tension remained, but something shifted. Whispers between officers. Hesitant glances toward the car. One of them radioed dispatch again. The tone of their voices had changed slightly, from accusatory to uncertain. Something wasn't adding up. Inside the car, Jaden had stopped crying but hadn't moved. His eyes were fixed on his father, who now sat upright on the sidewalk, still cuffed, still waiting. The child clutched the edge of the seat with both hands, unsure if he should get out, unsure if he was even allowed to. The world no longer felt like the same place it had been 30 minutes earlier. What neither of them knew in that moment was that a bystander across the street had begun filming shortly after the stop began. They had caught the commands, the guns, the cries of a child echoing from the back seat. They had captured the confusion, the fear, and the calm voice of a man trying to protect his son from a system that viewed him first as a suspect. That footage was still being recorded as dispatch delivered the information that would change everything. The car didn't match the suspects. The license plate number had been misread. The description, vague and unreliable, had been stretched to justify a mistake. But the damage had already begun. The moment dispatch confirmed the error, the shift in energy was instant, though no words were spoken aloud to acknowledge the gravity of what had just occurred. The officers who had once approached with drawn weapons and commanding voices now stood uncomfortably still, processing the reality that everything, from the traffic stop to the drawn guns and the handcuffs, had been based on a mistake. The license plate number had one digit off. The actual suspect's vehicle was a different make, a different color. The man with a child in the car matched no unique detail other than the fact that he, like Marcus, was black. The realization didn't bring immediate relief. Instead, it sank like a stone into the silence, heavy with the weight of harm already done. The officers unlocked Marcus's handcuffs with stiff hands and mumbled something about a misunderstanding. They offered no apology, no eye contact, no recognition of the child still sitting wide-eyed in the back seat. The words, "just a routine check," and "standard procedure," were tossed into the air like bandages meant to cover a wound far too deep for quick healing. Marcus remained calm on the surface, even as humiliation and rage pulsed beneath. There was no point in yelling. No power in protest. Not in that moment, and not in front of his son. So, he nodded quietly, accepted his license back, and returned to the car with his shoulders tense and jaw clenched. Jaden leaned forward from his seat, eyes scanning his father's face for signs of reassurance. He didn't find any. The ride home was quiet. The once chatty 6-year-old who had just hours ago been bubbling with excitement about gold stars and Father's Day drawings now sat in silence, his face turned to the window. Marcus tried to speak, tried to say that everything was fine now, but the words felt dishonest in his mouth. Everything was not fine. Nothing about what had just happened was normal, and even if they were physically safe, something sacred had been taken. Trust, safety, innocence. At home, Jaden hesitated to leave the car. He asked if the police were going to come back. He asked if they were mad at his daddy. He asked if Marcus had done something bad. Each question pierced deeper than the last. No child should have to ask those questions. No father should have to answer them. Yet here they were, pulled out of an ordinary day and dropped into a truth far too painful for a 6-year-old to carry. By nightfall, the video had made its way online. The bystander who had recorded it uploaded the footage with a brief caption, "Black father pulled over at gunpoint, child begs for his life." Within hours, the clip had been shared thousands of times. The comments flooded in, ranging from outrage to heartbreak to disbelief. People across the country watched as a calm, unarmed man was ordered to the ground while his child sobbed from the back seat. They saw the fear. They heard the child scream. They witnessed, in real time, what it meant to be profiled based on nothing more than appearance. News outlets picked up the story by the next morning. Civil rights activists called for accountability. Community leaders demanded transparency. Some city officials issued carefully worded statements expressing concern and promising to review the situation thoroughly. But for Marcus and Jaden, the review process didn't erase the memory. It didn't rewind time or undo the emotional damage. No press conference could fix the trembling in Jaden's voice when he now asked questions about police officers. No internal investigation could remove the image burned into Marcus's mind, of his son, terrified, screaming for his safety in broad daylight. In the days that followed, Marcus gave one quiet interview to a local journalist. He didn't rant. He didn't accuse. He simply told the truth. He described the moment he realized he had to move slowly, not to explain, but to survive. He described how he kept his voice low to avoid escalating the situation, how he gave up his own dignity in exchange for a higher priority, his child's life. And he spoke about the part that hurt most, watching the light in his son's eyes dim a little. Watching innocence collide with a world too cruel, too complicated. The story resonated. Not because it was unique, but because it wasn't. It echoed a familiar pattern that too many families knew. The familiarity was the most haunting part, that somewhere else, another child might be preparing a Father's Day card, unaware that a similar moment could await them. That safety, for some, is a fragile illusion, breakable with one mistaken digit or one misread assumption. No charges were filed. No apology was made public. The officers involved remained on duty, though one was quietly placed on administrative leave. There would be no courtroom resolution, no moment of justice wrapped neatly in closure. But the video lived on. So did the voice of a 6-year-old boy, echoing in millions of minds, "Please don't shoot my daddy." And even as the news cycle moved on, as it always did, Marcus and Jaden were left to carry what the headlines couldn't: the silence after the sirens, the ache after the crowd, the quiet work of healing after the harm. Time moved forward, but the weight of that afternoon never truly lifted. In the weeks that followed, Marcus and Jaden settled back into their routines, but nothing about life felt the same. Normal had taken on a different shape, one tinged with caution, one shadowed by glances over the shoulder, one where a child looked twice before trusting the people once called protectors. Jaden's school noticed the change first. The boy who used to race to the front of the class with wide-eyed wonder had grown quieter, more withdrawn. He startled easily at loud noises. When the classroom practiced fire drills, he covered his ears and asked if the police were coming. His teachers, concerned, called home. Marcus explained just enough for them to understand. They listened with sympathetic silence, unsure of what to say. There were no lesson plans for processing trauma, no assignments for restoring a child's sense of safety. At night, Jaden sometimes asked his father to sleep in the same room. He didn't say why, but Marcus understood. The darkness had taken on new meanings. What had once been the backdrop to bedtime stories now became a space filled with questions. About fairness, about danger, about why some people were treated differently even when they had done nothing wrong. The answers, when they came, were soft and careful. Marcus chose his words with precision, not because he wanted to hide the truth, but because he knew how permanent it would become once spoken. Once a child understands fear, it cannot be unlearned. The community, though sympathetic, eventually turned its attention elsewhere. Outrage cooled. New headlines emerged. The cycle continued. People moved on, except for those who couldn't. Marcus still passed the same intersection where it all began, every day on the way to work. He changed his route for a while, but eventually returned to it, not out of defiance, but out of necessity. Life had to go on, even if the road carried memories. He continued to receive messages from strangers, some supportive, some hateful, many from parents who had lived through similar moments. Fathers who had been cuffed in front of their children. Mothers who had been questioned while their babies cried in the back seat. Young men who had been told they fit the description one too many times. These stories created a quiet network of shared pain, invisible but undeniable. A patchwork of resilience bound not by choice but by circumstance. Though Marcus never sought the spotlight, the video of his encounter kept circulating. Activists included it in discussions about reform. Students analyzed it in classrooms. Civil rights lawyers referenced it in calls for new legislation. It became more than a moment, it became a symbol. But symbols come with a cost. While the world watched and debated, Marcus and Jaden lived with the ripple effects. They carried the part that wasn't captured on camera, the fear that lingered long after the footage ended. Eventually, a local nonprofit reached out, asking if Marcus would speak at a youth mentoring event. They wanted him to share his story, not as a victim, but as a father. He hesitated at first. He didn't see himself as an activist. He was just a man trying to get his son home. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized how many children looked like his son. How many fathers looked like him. How many rides home could end differently. So he agreed. Not for attention, but for truth. He spoke softly but firmly, standing in front of a small group of teens and parents. He didn't retell the whole story. He didn't need to. Instead, he talked about the moments in between, the split seconds where a wrong assumption could become a lifelong scar. He talked about fear, not as weakness, but as a survival instinct. He talked about love, the kind that makes a man lie flat on the pavement because he knows his child is watching. The message landed. Not because it was perfectly delivered, but because it was real. A quiet truth in a loud world. Jaden grew older, as children do, but the memory remained etched in his understanding of the world. Over time, He found ways to express it, in drawings, in questions, sometimes in silence. He began to see the incident not just as a frightening day, but as a moment that revealed something bigger. He came to understand that his father hadn't done anything wrong. That sometimes, injustice wears a uniform. That bravery doesn't always come with a badge. Sometimes it comes from staying calm when every instinct tells you to run. Years later, when the topic came up in school, Jaden raised his hand. He told his classmates that his dad was once pulled out of a car because someone thought he looked suspicious. The room went quiet. Then he said, "But he didn't yell or fight. He just stayed calm so I wouldn't get scared. That's what brave looks like." And in that moment, what had once been a trauma became something more, a lesson passed on, a truth spoken, a scar turned into strength. The child in the back seat had grown. But he would never forget what it meant to be there. Sometimes, the most unforgettable moments are the ones that weren't supposed to happen. A father, mistaken. A child, terrified. A routine drive, forever changed. But from that pain, came truth. And from that truth, came a voice. Marcus never asked to be a symbol. Jaden never asked to be afraid. Yet their story became one, not just of injustice, but of love, of restraint, of unimaginable strength. Because bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's silent. Sometimes, it's lying still, just so your child can make it home. If this story moved you, share it. Because somewhere, another child is sitting in the back seat, still believing the world is fair. Let's make sure we earn that belief. Bell like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life stories that deserve to be heard.